I haven't made a video for YouTube for a while because I've received a lot of unwanted attention over my videos from some academics, which has had two effects. It's meant I had to lay low for a little while till the heat died down, but probably more so, it made me feel a bit demotivated to get back into making videos. I'll tell you more about all of that in a video that's coming soon, but right now I'm back because the Post Office Horizon inquiry is back. The inquiry is back in the sense of it being back on our screens. We had the live broadcast of the official release of Volume 1 of the final report, just broadcast a few weeks ago. So what I've decided to do is make a video about it, but a slightly different one from usual. I'm going to have a go at a reactions type video. So I'll play the video of the release of Volume 1 of the inquiry report, and I'll play it in full, so nothing edited out. But I'll pause the video now and again and share my thoughts with you, kind of my live reactions. So we get to sit through the report together, and you get to see how I go about my analysis in real time. Now, I'll try not to interrupt the video too much, but just have to warn you that that presentation of the report, it was just over 40 minutes long. So this is going to be a bit of a long video, so it could run over into the hour. And I'll put chapter markers in so you can duck in and out of it if you can't sit through the whole thing with me in one go. And the other thing is, I want to add comments as well, or kind of do some final summing up, because I'm not sure my analysis will fully make sense as we go through it. You'll just get my reactions, but I'll try to draw out the main points at the end, and I'll put that into a second video so that this one doesn't get too long, because it'll take an age to upload to YouTube. And yeah, it might not be an attractive video because it's so long. So I'll put it in part 2. Now, the other thing is that I haven't read the report, so I don't know the contents of the report. So I'm going on what was said in the presentation about the report. Now, I've not done a reactions type video before, so this is a bit scary. So video is queued up. There it is. So that bit's working. Not sure how this is going to go. Not sure how much sense I'm going to make, and all it might end up doing is showing you what a moron I am, but let's see. I'll give it a go and see what happens. And let's hope this works. Okay. Here we go.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Layla Pilgrim. I am the Secretary to the Post Office Horizon IT Inquiry. I see many familiar faces here, so some of you I already know. On behalf of Sir Win Williams and the wider inquiry team, I would like to wish you a warm welcome to this launch event. Before I say anything more, and I will be brief because I do know that Sir Win is the main act, not me, I just wanted to introduce you to the people who are seated at the table, some of whom may be familiar to you, but others less so. At the far left, as a member of the inquiry team, the solicitor to the inquiry, Mr. Shegan Jide. Next to Mr. Jide is Mr. Jason Beer, KC. Next to Mr. Beer is Erica Eliasson Norris, who is one of the assessors in the inquiry. Sir Win Williams is well known to you and is the chair of our inquiry. Mr. David Page is the other assessor who, together with Erica Eliason Norris, has accompanied Sir Win when sitting in person, but they have also been part of all of the hearings when they took place remotely. As many of you know, earlier today, this event began with the lock-in sessions where court participants had an opportunity to see the report and to read it under embargo before it was laid in Parliament and then published on our inquiry website. This second session provides an opportunity for Sir Win to make a few remarks. Two things before I introduce Sir Win. Firstly, he will not be taking questions after he has spoken. And secondly, please do not leave when this part of the event is over. We have prepared lunch, not personally, but we have prepared lunch for you, and that will be served at 1 p.m. But anyway, I am mindful that I stand between you and hearing from Sir Win, so without further delay, Sir Win Williams.
Okay, just let's pause it there just briefly. There's a few things right from the start, and this might sound really superficial, but the lighting is awful, the sound is awful, and the whole staging is awful. It feels really cold and detached. But then the welcome that Layla's giving is really warm. So there's this kind of mix of strangeness with familiarity, a kind of formality mixed in with friendliness. And things like that somewhat harsh, no questions please, and don't leave till we tell you to. And that gets softened with that explanation. Don't leave because we've prepared lunch for you. And then there's this little joke that's inserted in there too. So there's informality to put people at ease, but there's a sort of tension. And she sounds nervous, and the whole panel looked nervous. And that kind of creates another tension. And that's the stuff that's making me curious, making me wonder if there's what's sitting behind this thing. And the thing that's made me also curious, maybe sparked from that, is the way Sir Win has been positioned in a particular way, in the way he's been introduced, in the way he's been referred to. Can you spot it? I'll tell you what I've spotted when I sum up, maybe in part 2. But there's something I think quite interesting going on there. But let's go on for a little bit longer.
Before I begin the formal part of my speech, you can see that I've surrounded myself with a Praetorian Guard, just in case.
Right, I didn't get very far. Sorry. Just want to pause it there. Praetorian Guard. So, it's nice. He's kind of warm, jokiness. I love that kind of cheeky, chappy side to Win. He's got that little mischievous glint in his eye. But it's a bit of an odd joke. The Praetorian Guard, from my memory, were this elite troop of soldiers who were, this is the time of ancient Rome, that their job was to protect the emperor. So, I'm not saying that Win thinks of himself as the emperor, but it's a joke about needing protection. So, why is Win needing protection? Is it because folk might not like what's in it? Is it because what he's about to tell us is going to make us angry, going to make folk angry? And who's the folk? Who's the us? Is it the post office? Horizon? Government? Or is it the public? You and me? Or is it the core participants? I know it's just a joke and you can't read too much into jokes, but it's kind of adding to that tension. It's a joke in a kind of quite tense environment, but a joke that kind of leads you to wonder whether there's something going to happen here, whether we're going to feel let down or we're going to feel angry about anything he's going to say about the report. Anyway, let's move on a bit further. Let's get into this and see what he actually has got to say.
It's very good to see so many people attending this event. I've always been extremely grateful for the interest that everyone has shown in this inquiry, not least, of course, the people most directly affected. But there's been a wider interest as well, and I'm very grateful for that. And so I wanted to start what I have to say by thanking everyone publicly for participating in the inquiry so far. Now, those of you with good memories may remember that I've made video-recorded speeches about aspects of the work of the inquiry on 2 occasions. The first video was made available as long ago as the 30th of September 2022, shortly before Phase 2 of the inquiry got going. The second became available on the 17th of July 2023, the day my interim report was laid before Parliament. In each of those videos, I emphasised the importance of 2 strands of investigation, which were inextricably linked and which would be crucial parts of the work of the inquiry. Those strands were: 1, discovering and explaining the nature and extent of the adverse consequences suffered by so many as a result of the misplaced reliance upon the dependability and accuracy of Horizon, what we've come to call in this inquiry the human impact. And 2, discovering and assessing whether the Department for Business and Trade and the Post Office had made good or were making good upon the often repeated assurances from ministers, departmental officials, and senior personnel within the Post Office that financial redress for those who had suffered adverse consequences would be full, fair, and prompt. Over the nearly 3 years since I first highlighted those strands of investigation, nothing has occurred which has led me to change my view of their importance. It should come as no surprise, therefore, to those who have been following the progress of the inquiry, that as soon as I had completed the oral evidence gathering phases, I turned my mind to whether I should deal with the issues of human impact and redress as part of a much larger report, or whether I should produce a part of my report, Volume 1, dealing discreetly with human impact and redress as soon as it was written. As will now be obvious, I chose the latter course.
Take yourself off mute. So a few things to keep in mind here. First, there's the acknowledgement by Sir Wynne of everyone else who's been involved, but also of the enormous public interest there's been in the inquiry. And he then seems to give us a sort of a you knew this was coming bit, where he refers to his previous reports, which he told us, that's what's coming today. He's saying that he'd already telegraphed in what this was going to be about, what Volume 1 was going to be about. And again, I'm wondering if he's a bit worried about us being disappointed by what he's about to say. And then he gets on to the focus of the report, which is that human impact. So it's really a focus on the victims. He's telling us that this is the focus of the report. We're focusing on the victims. And this is good. This is great stuff. Well, maybe it's great stuff. It's that principle that first you look after the victim of the crime and then you deal with the perpetrator of the crime. You focus on restoring the dignity and safety of the victim before you seek the accountability from the perpetrators. And it's sometimes linked to trauma-informed work, like a trauma-informed approach is kind of how it's known these days. And we've seen a shift towards this type of approach in the criminal justice system. It's been happening over the last 30 or 40 years. So it's kind of not unexpected to see it. In some ways, good to see it, but there's some problems with this. There's some big problems with this type of approach, and I'll talk to you about it at the end. But let's watch a little bit more.
I chose this path because it is essential, in my view, that I provide a detailed report about the schemes which have been developed to deliver financial redress as soon as I reasonably could. That way, I would be able to report upon how they had performed historically and also attempt to predict how they were likely to perform going forward. Having heard and read a very substantial amount of evidence, I concluded that some aspects of the schemes could be improved substantially. In those circumstances, it made no sense for me to wait until the whole of my report had been completed and was ready for publication before revealing my views. However, I was also firmly of the view that a report which considered and reached conclusions about the schemes without first describing the adverse consequences which gave rise to the need for redress would be sadly lacking in context. I appreciate, of course, that much has been written and said about the adverse consequences suffered by postmasters and others over the last 25 plus years. Nonetheless, in the early months of 2022, I heard sworn evidence from a large number of people who allowed themselves to be questioned about deeply personal issues in the full glare of a statutory public inquiry. Throughout the whole length of the inquiry, I have received written evidence and other sources of information about the nature and scale of the human impact visited upon so many. The picture which has emerged is profoundly disturbing. It would have been wholly wrong of me to present this volume of my report without describing in some detail the human suffering which has given rise to the need for complex schemes for providing financial redress to those who have been wronged. Let me turn then to describe what this volume contains for those of you who have not yet seen it. Following an introduction, I list my recommendations. The introduction and the list are sections 1 and 2 respectively. Section 3 is devoted to human impact. It has 3 subsections: a short introduction, a summary of the main types of impact suffered by the various categories of people who are adversely affected, and then there are 17 case illustrations, which I chose because it seemed to me that between them, they provided a cogent basis for all or virtually all of the adverse consequences which I'd already described. I acknowledge the possibility that the case illustrations may contain the odd factual inaccuracy. I say that because in the main, they are based upon the recollections of persons who are seeking to describe events which had occurred many years ago and often without contemporaneous documents to prompt their memories. But such inaccuracies as exist do not matter. The case illustrations are intended to paint a very broad but compelling picture of the type of harm which very many people have suffered. I am completely satisfied that they achieve that purpose. As I have said once already, but I repeat, the picture which has emerged and which is described in my report is profoundly disturbing. In summary, what does that picture reveal? Many thousands of people have suffered serious financial detriment, and for a sizable proportion, that detriment subsists. Many people have, inevitably, suffered emotional turmoil and significant stress in consequence. Many businesses and homes have been lost. Bankruptcies have occurred. Marriage and families have been wrecked. Between 2000 and 2013 in England and Wales, and for some time after 2013 in Northern Ireland and Scotland, postmasters and others suffered the trauma of criminal prosecution, conviction, and punishment. And for some, punishment meant lengthy periods of imprisonment. I received reports that some people held liable for shortfalls became ill as a consequence. Tragically, I heard too of people of whom it is said that they were driven to take their own lives. Section 4 is a very long and detailed section which contains a summary of the evidence which I heard and read relating to redress. I readily acknowledge that it is a difficult read for all except the most committed. It deals primarily with the schemes which have evolved for delivering financial redress to those who are entitled to it, but also covers other discrete issues which relate to financial redress. The section ends with a short section on restorative justice, a concept with which I was unfamiliar until it was introduced to me in this inquiry.
Okay. Yeah, so it's restorative justice. That's the thing he was telegraphing in. So that didn't surprise me, but I had to pause there because it did surprise me. He said that he hadn't come across restorative justice before. The other thing is, I needed to say something about him summarizing the level of the social harm and the adverse consequences. How disturbing and distressing we're likely to find reading the report. And it's distressing just hearing that small summary of the kind of, it reminds us of the scale of the harm. You know, it was on such a massive scale and it was at such a depth that it was absolutely heartbreaking. And the other thing he's saying here is that the schemes that are supposed to provide that restoration are failing. Like, these are two things, the distress and the effectiveness of the systems of redress. These are two of the biggest problems with restorative justice. I'll explain more about this type of justice and these two big problems with it at the end in part 2 in my. I'll save it up till then, but let's just watch a bit more.
In Section 5, I identify those core participants from whom I have received written and oral submissions about financial and other forms of redress. And then we have Section 6, which contains my conclusions and recommendations. Early on in that section, I pose the following question. Have the Post Office, the Department and ministers delivered financial redress to claimants which is full and fair, and have they done so promptly? In much of the remainder of that section, I set out my answers to all the component parts of that question. Before spending a few minutes summarizing some of those answers, however, let me explain how Section 6 begins. No more than a few lines have gone by before I make my first recommendation. And that says this: His Majesty's Government and or the Department, and where appropriate the Post Office and Fujitsu, shall provide written responses to my recommendations by the 10th of October 2025. Some may think this recommendation is some kind of challenge to the government in general, the department in particular, the Post Office and Fujitsu. It is not. Rather, I categorize it more in the nature of a plea by me to all those who need to make decisions about my remaining recommendations to do so as quickly as they can. It would not be appropriate, in my view, to kick the can down the road and wait for the remainder of my report before deciding about whether to accept my recommendations. I suggest that a period of 3 months in order to make a decision about whether to accept or reject them is quite sufficient in all the circumstances. All the recommendations formulated, except that first recommendation, and numbers 17 and 19, are concerned with the schemes for financial redress. If my recommendations are to have their maximum effect, decisions about recommendations 2 to 16 and 18 must be made swiftly, and if, as I hope, of course, the recommendations are accepted, the sooner they are implemented, the better.
Keep forgetting to come off mute. Okay, he's talking about the key problem with restorative justice. So I'll mention it here rather than you having to wait for part 2. It's the problem if the process takes too long, the victims can be left in a worse situation. And everyone around the victim can lose faith in the justice system because justice isn't seen to be done. And people fear that the perpetrators are going to get away with it, or that the perpetrators will continue doing the harm. And we've got that problem here with the post office. They're continuing to do harm. All right, let's keep going a bit longer.
What are some of the conclusions that I have reached about the schemes for providing financial redress? This is a thumbnail sketch. I'm afraid if you want the real meat of it, you will have to read Section 6. I'm going to deal with each scheme in turn and quite shortly. First of all, the Horizon Shortfall Scheme. This scheme has always been administered and delivered by the Post Office, although to a degree the department has pulled some strings too. Between May 2020 and the 30th of July 2024, all claims were assessed. The picture which emerges in relation to settlement within that period is as follows. A high percentage of the most modest claims were settled for the sums which were claimed, or for sums very close to those which were claimed. Whether some of those settlements were in reality full and fair can only be a matter of conjecture. Many claims in the brackets 20,000 to 60,000 were likely assessed at sums which were not full and fair. On the available evidence, I cannot confirm that a majority of high-value claims which were resolved on or before that date, the 31st of July 2024, were settled for sums which were full and fair. On any view, many of the larger claims have proved very difficult to settle. To illustrate that point, as of the 30th of January of this year, there were 314 claims which had been submitted between May 2020 and the 27th of November 2020, but had still not been settled. A large proportion of those claims have been and continue to be very difficult to resolve because of their complexity and potential value. A fixed sum offer of £75,000 has been available to claimants since the 31st of July 2024. A significant number of claimants have opted to accept that sum. It is widely acknowledged that some of those claimants will have received sums which exceed the true value of their claims. It is as yet unclear whether the claims which have been assessed since the 31st of July 2024 have resulted in settlements which it would be proper to categorise as full and fair. As of the 30th of April of this year, HSS, as I'll use the acronym for shorthand form, had received 9,437 eligible claims, 6,644 offers had been made, and 5,812 had been accepted. Those in my legal team who assist me to keep track of recent events have discovered that HSS had received a total of 887 eligible claims by early June. There had been 7,188 offers and 6,426 acceptances. There are still more than 3,000 claims to resolve, and the likelihood is that there are approximately 1,500 complex and standard claims which are either in the process of assessment or waiting for the process to begin. In my view, if HSS is closed, as I recommend it should be, on the 27th of November of this year, a number of years would still be necessary to deal with all the claims which would be unresolved on that date.
It's extraordinary how many delays there have been, how long people have been waiting to get redress, and how long this whole thing has been going on for. You know, this is just the final chapter of a scandal that's gone on for 25 years. What he's really telling us is that this is not an inquiry into a wrong that they've done, but into a wrong that they're continuing to do. It's ongoing. The bastards have carried on doing the harm, even when their wrongdoing was under the spotlight. You know, that takes a special type of arrogance, doesn't it? Anyway, sorry, I'm getting angry. Let's get back to Win, and I'll calm down a bit. But Jesus, has gone on for so long. As is this video. We're halfway through the presentation. This is another 20 minutes of the presentation. I'll try not to interrupt too much.
On any view, there have been egregious delays in HSS for which the Post Office and the Department have frequently apologised. The overturned conviction scheme and the more recently announced Horizon Conviction Redress Scheme. Until the 3rd of January, OCS, as I call the overturned conviction scheme, was administered and delivered by the Post Office. 111 persons have had their convictions quashed by the courts and are eligible for financial redress. 3 persons who were prosecuted but not convicted are also eligible for redress under this scheme. It opened in July 2021, following the quashing of convictions in December 2020 at the Southwark Crown Court and in April 2021 at the Court of Appeal Criminal Division. Interim payments were made promptly to those whose convictions were quashed, except for 3 claimants who were denied interim payments, unfairly, in my view, on what was described as public interest grounds. Between the opening of the scheme
Just have to comment the tension. I just have to comment on the tension. He's nervous. He's been nervous the whole way through. But there you could see his hand shaking. I mean, it was shaking so much, he ended up banging his teeth on the glass. I'm not being critical of him. I mean, he's human. We all get nervous, but it feels a little odd. I mean, it might point to the weight that he's bearing with this whole inquiry. But he's struggling with his nerves. And Layla was. Right at the start, you see Layla sounded really nervous. And Wynn's doing this thing. Let me see if I can show you. So he's doing this thing. I don't want to get too much into body language. That's the worst type of psychology. But he's doing this thing of where he looks as though he's trying to reset himself. That kind of lifting his arms up off the desk and then putting back down again. It's as though he's trying to reset himself, trying to settle. And I think the glass, when he had that drink of water, I think that made him really aware that his nerves were showing, that it was obvious he was nervous to people watching. And he was also tripping over his words a few times. So I think he's trying to control his nerves, but it's not working. And I think he might be surprised at how nervous he is and how nervous he's coming across. And he might, I don't know, we're the worst for trying to get inside people's heads. Psychologists know nothing, by the way. But I think he's getting a bit impatient with himself. And I don't know, maybe something else is going on. But I might just rewind it just for a second and then we'll continue, because I think I just chopped him off when he was starting to speak again. There we go. Oops.
Between the opening of the scheme and the publication of my interim report in July 2023, there were a number of partial settlements, especially relating to non-pecuniary losses, but there had been no more than a handful of settlements of both pecuniary and non-pecuniary losses. In September 2023, a fixed sum offer of £600,000 became available to those in this scheme whose convictions had been quashed. I understand the current position to be that 71 claims have been settled in full, 62 claimants have accepted the fixed sum offer of £600,000, and 9 claimants have had their claims assessed and accepted offers in settlement following assessment. That figure includes 1 claimant who was prosecuted but not convicted. 13 claimants have yet to submit particularized claims, and the remaining claims are in various stages of partial settlement or negotiation. It is impossible for me to tell you whether the settlements so far achieved can be categorized as full and fair, since I have not thought it appropriate to compel evidence from individuals about their settlements, and very little information has been volunteered by the claimants, who obviously value their privacy. The more recent scheme, which I'll call HCRS, was constituted as a discrete scheme administered and delivered by the department in July 2024. It was set up to deliver redress to those whose convictions were quashed by legislation. The fixed sum offer of £600,000 has been a feature of HCRS from its inception, and so far as I am aware, all claimants whose claims have been settled, or at least who settled prior to the 3rd of June 2025, opted to accept the fixed sum offer. On the 3rd of June 2025, the overturned conviction scheme was amalgamated with HCRS. From the date of amalgamation, the scheme has been administered by the and delivered by the department. The amalgamation of those two schemes was obviously sensible, which I suppose begs the question, why were there ever two distinct schemes for claimants whose convictions had been quashed? One operated and delivered by the Post Office, and one operated and delivered by the department. OCS has not been without unjustified delay. The time taken to formulate pecuniary principles was described as a tortuous process. That is, in plain English, it took far too long. Furthermore, the process to formulate those principles did not begin until approximately 18 months after the scheme had been announced.
18 months. This is shocking. I mean, are you finding it shocking? It took them, there's an 18-month delay before they figured out the process of this stuff. Yeah, that's insulting. You think maybe it's on purpose, just to continue punishing the sub-postmasters.
The Group Litigation Order Scheme, GLOS, was set up to provide financial redress to those claimants who had been party to the group litigation brought against the Post Office and which was settled in late 2019. As is now well known, the claimants in the litigation appear to have won a famous victory. Unfortunately, the compensation they received under the deed of settlement did not properly reflect their losses. After a period of reflection, the government of the day agreed to provide funds so that additional financial redress could be made to those claimants. The scheme was announced in March 2022. Unfortunately, a year went by after the announcement before the scheme was opened. It has always been administered and delivered by the department. There are potentially 492 claimants. By the 30th of April of this year, the number of fully particularized claims submitted to the department stood at 450. 445 offers had been made, of which 304 had been accepted. 42 claimants had not submitted their claims. By my reckoning, as of the 30th of April 2025, there were 146 claims unresolved. My team tell me that at least 4 further claimants have submitted particularized claims by early June, but that would still leave 38 claimants who have yet to start the process of presenting a claim. A fixed sum offer of £75,000 was introduced in this scheme in January 2024. Of the 304 claimants who had accepted their offers by the 30th of April 2025, approximately 50% opted to accept the fixed sum offer, with obviously the same percentage or thereabouts opting for assessment. I have received no information about individual settlements, although I have been made aware that a number of claimants have expressed their unhappiness with the level of offers made to them. You should know that people continue to correspond with me right up until very recently about these matters. The likelihood is that most, if not all, of the claims which are unresolved are to be assessed. That means, in my view, that there is a great deal of work to be done if these cases are to be resolved satisfactorily within any kind of reasonable timescale. I say that because it appears clear that in many cases in which assessment is taking place, the valuations placed upon the claims by the claimants and their advisors, on the one hand, and the departments and its advisors on the other, is markedly different. I would like to emphasize that a number of recommendations which I make are aimed at removing some of the obstacles which currently exist along the path to achieving settlements which are full and fair. Even if the recommendations are accepted and implemented swiftly, however, it is difficult to imagine that the unresolved cases can be settled anytime soon. I am loath to predict when all the claims in that scheme will be resolved, but I very much doubt whether settlements of every claim can be achieved before the end of next year.
I think this is part of the acute sense of injustice we might be feeling here. Are you feeling it? I'm certainly feeling it. Fairness is. It talks about fairness an awful lot. This whole thing is about fairness, isn't it? But it's measured by a number of things, and one of the important things is timeliness. Timeliness is such an important part of it. Justice delayed is justice denied, because those not directly harmed move on with their lives, but the victims can't. And that's why things should never take this long. And when they do take this long, it just adds to the damned injustice of it all.
To repeat, there are likely to be 150 claims or thereabouts in the process of assessment, which is a large number still. There is one last point which I wish to stress about each scheme. Although it is correct to say that the schemes are administered and delivered by either the post office or the department, everyone should understand that the persons who ultimately decide upon the awards to be made to claimants are not employees of the post office or the department. In both HSS and the group litigation scheme, the ultimate decision makers are independently appointed panels of appropriate experts. If their decisions are flawed, there is an entitlement to seek a review before a very experienced retired judge. In fact, there are 2 judges, one for each scheme. Those whose convictions have been quashed, that is, the claimants in OCS and HCRS, are not obliged to accept offers made to them by the department. They have preserved rights to seek redress in the courts. I turn finally to say something about my recommendations. Recommendations 2 to 16 all relate to the existing financial redress schemes.
Okay, he's still looking nervous. I know I'm not picking on him. I think there's something important here. Now, I might be totally wrong. He might have a shaky hand because he's got a medical issue. I don't know. Maybe he has. But all the way through this presentation, we're getting that kind of edgy vibe. And it might be the audience. The audience might be feeling on edge what you find is that when an audience feels on edge, the presenter often picks that up and starts to feel on edge too, and the audience picks that up and feels even more on edge, and then you get this kind of death spiral going on. So there might be a little bit of that that's going on here. But I think there's something behind the edginess of the whole thing that I think could be revealing something. But anyway, let's just continue a bit longer. We've got about 10 minutes of the report left, so yeah, we're getting there. Thanks for sticking with it.
They are all intended to improve these schemes, but I readily accept that even if my recommendations are accepted and implemented as quickly as I would like, they will not constitute some magic formula for removing all of the problems from which the schemes suffer. As my report makes clear, I am critical of the Post Office and the Department in relation to the development and evolution of these schemes in a number of important respects, not least in relation to some of the egregious delays which have occurred. I cannot say plainly enough that there should not have been 4 distinct and separate schemes for delivering financial redress. It is true that recently 2 of the schemes have been merged, so that the number of schemes with which I am concerned is 3, but that improvement is likely to make very little difference to the time it will take to provide financial redress to all claimants. However, to use that ultra-modern phrase, we are where we are, and I, for one, cannot imagine scrapping all the schemes and starting again. Such a step would likely add many years to the period of time which would elapse before redress is paid out to all claimants, and I cannot contemplate that. I do not propose to discuss in what I thought would be a short speech, but seems to be longer than I anticipated, the substance of the recommendations 2 to 16. The details of each of the schemes are set out in section 4 of my report, and the reasoning which underpins each recommendation is set out in section 6. That said, I would like to make 2 points. First, many of the recommendations are directed at the Horizon Shortfall Scheme and the newly created appeals process within that scheme. And accordingly, those recommendations should be viewed and considered as a package and not just individually. I make it clear that I share the view of the Business and Trade Committee that the Horizon Shortfall Scheme is the scheme which is in most need of remedial attention. That, of course, is not surprising, given that it has had to handle close to 10,000 claims, and there may yet be many more to come. There can be no doubt that but for the availability of the fixed sum offer in that scheme, it would have been overwhelmed. Second, recommendations 2, 3, and 5, which apply to all schemes, and recommendations 11 and 12, which apply to the group litigation scheme, are made so as to seek to ensure, so far as possible, that the main processes in each scheme are at least similar or broadly comparable. That leaves recommendations 17, 18, and 19. I have been persuaded that the victims of wrongdoing and the public at large will never be convinced by words from lawyers that financial redress schemes which are administered and delivered by the alleged wrongdoer are truly independent. Furthermore, with the growing appetite which undoubtedly appears to exist for redress schemes to operate without reference to the courts or a formal arbitration structure, it is, in my view, necessary to create a body which has the expertise and capability to administer and deliver redress schemes which are and are seen to be wholly independent of the public body alleged to be responsible for the wrongdoing which has created the need for redress. However, and this may disappoint some, let me stress now that I do not believe that such a body could be created sufficiently quickly to make it viable for that body to take over the administration and delivery of financial redress in the existing schemes. Recommendation 17, if accepted, must be implemented with considerable care and with a clear set of objectives laid out from the start.
So a little further back, he said the phrase, "We are where we are." I mean, he's saying where we are here, and it's terrible. It's just a sign of how terrible the scandal is. What he's kind of describing is we're boxed in now because of the pathetic tardiness of the government and the post office to deal with this in a reasonable time frame. And it means that we can't get this properly sorted because the time it would take to get it properly sorted would just add to the injustice of it all. The injustice is now becoming as much about the feet dragging of the perpetrators than it is about what the perpetrators had done. And I think this is what's sitting behind Wynne having to present his report in separate parts, to report on the issue of redress before we get to the bit on accountability. Maybe he's aware, he seems quite aware of how we might respond to all of this, and he perhaps is aware that we might not be happy that accountability seems to be being pushed back a little bit still. So maybe that's some of the nerves, I don't know. But anyway, the bit that hopefully brings the perpetrators to account, brings them to justice, will be volume 2. Fingers crossed. But this is why, you probably guessed it, this is why perpetrators of harm drag their heels. You know, we've heard of whitewashers. This is something that's far more insidious. It's you could call it a time wash or something. I don't know what we'd call it. But it's, that thing where you stall long enough and the justice or the call for justice just grows stale. You remember Tim Parker with his testimony to the inquiry. He's the past chair of the Post Office Board. He kept shifting time around in his witness performance when he was kind of answering questions. He did this thing with shifting the context by shifting the time in the way he responded. And it's kind of a way to escape accountability. I made a video on little Timmy Parker. It's on my YouTube channel. I'll put a link up on the description box if you want to have a look at it and you haven't seen it. Anyway, let's carry on. We've got 5 minutes. So let's get to the end. And I'll sum up and then I'll start on part 2, where I'll do a fuller summing up. Okay, I can't get it to work now.
As will become obvious from a careful reading of my report, there are literally thousands of claimants in the Horizon Shortfall Scheme who are waiting for their claims to be assessed. And some of those, and there may still be more than 300, have been waiting for 5 years, and there is still no end in sight. There are claimants in the overturned conviction scheme whose convictions were quashed by the courts in 2020 and 2021, who are still to be fully compensated. And there are still about 150 people who are parties to the group litigation who are waiting for the assessment process to run its course. I do not believe there is any justification for all those persons to be put on hold while a new body is created. As I describe in my report, the existing schemes are flawed, but in my view, the schemes can be improved significantly, says he, if my recommendations are accepted and implemented. Let me say a word about recommendation 19. As I have implied, the phrase restorative justice was new to me when I began my work on this inquiry. Yet as the work of the inquiry gathered pace, and particularly during the course of the hearings last year, the call for measures which are associated with the umbrella phrase restorative justice became louder and more persistent. The Post Office and Fujitsu embraced the concept with what I might describe as varying degrees of enthusiasm.
Right. This might be a little naive. The thing is, any call for justice would have been resulted in a varying degrees of enthusiasm. You know, he's using that as a euphemism. He means they're pig-headed and obstructive. But the thing is, restorative justice, apart from the financial costs that can be incurred by the perpetrator if they have to pay compensation to the victim, apart from that, it's quite an attractive option for the perpetrator. It's more attractive than retributive justice. I'll talk about the differences between restorative justice, which is all the big focus here, and retributive justice, which is maybe something we're wanting instead of this. But I'll talk about that in part 2 when I pull everything together. The thing is, if retributive justice, you know, making people accountable, punishing them, if that's delayed, restorative justice is the thing that just fills the gap. It becomes seen as the right thing to do. Not because it gets to accountability, but because the punishment feels out of reach. And when you've got that delay, it benefits the perpetrator, because those calls for retribution just start to fade. You know, but the victim's suffering still remains. So over time, you get the focus shifting from justice to healing. Restorative justice is the thing that steps in. It's not a resolution, but is what's left when the emotional fuel for retribution runs dry. You know, that focus on anger, the anger and the outrage starts to pass, starts to fade, and then people focus on compassion. You know, we need to look after the victims. And so the delay kind of becomes this strategy used by perpetrators of harm as a way of avoiding punishment for the harm they've done, to drag things on through the courts for as long as they can, so that people no longer shout for retribution, that the anger starts to fade away, that suddenly people are starting more to talk about restoration. You know, people start saying things like, oh, it's gone on long enough now, let's just find a way to move forward. You know, compromise begins to feel the point of redemption rather than a point of disappointment. So in this sense, it kind of reframes justice. Yeah, this response doesn't erase the harm, it reshapes how we respond to the harm when we're replacing a call for retribution with a call for restoration. Anyway, we're really close to the end. 3 minutes. I'll try to play to the end without interrupting.
I was left with the impression, however, that they would both at least consider what sort of package of measures would be appropriate. Yet to date, I have heard nothing, hence the need for a specific recommendation. In my view, departmental involvement in this process would also be very welcome. I have said nothing about recommendation 18 as yet. Without doubt, I found the issue of financial redress for family members to be very difficult to resolve. I have been acutely conscious of the difficulties which family members would face if they were seeking to pursue claims against the Post Office, the Department, or Fujitsu in the courts. That said, I am also mindful that these schemes are not and have never been constrained by established legal principles. Accordingly, I have reached the conclusion that fairness demands that financial redress should be provided for those family members who have suffered serious adverse consequences as a result of the treatment meted out to their loved ones. I'd like to conclude by paying a special tribute to all those who have helped me compile this first volume of our report. They are here, they are in this room, they are all the lawyers who made compelling submissions to me. The inquiry, I trust, has gone smoothly to date, and in huge measure, that is down to you and not me. Thank you very much. Enough. It's time for lunch.
Okay. Right. That was nice in the end. So it's nice. Oops. Let's get that out of the way. It was nice to whereas one that yeah, of course families should get compensated. But it was nice that he was doing that acknowledgement thing, acknowledgement of the people around him. It's not just him. We put the report together as a big team of people. But again, there's an edge to this, which is in the context of what's happened in the inquiry. It even puts an edge on that bit of warmth at the end. There's something unpleasant here. There's an unpleasant echo here. Remember how individual sub-postmasters were told they were the only ones who had a problem with the Horizon system? And the first point of pushback from those sub-postmasters was, but it's not just me. So Wynne, yeah, you weren't the only one who did the work that sits behind the report. And yeah, to every sub-postmaster, you weren't the only one who had the problem with Horizon. The edginess comes in when we remember that the perpetrators were saying the same thing in relation to the harm they did. They say they were saying it to dodge accountability for the harm that they'd done. The likes of Venables and Parker and Perkins and the rest of them. They each sought to persuade us that they weren't the only ones. There are other people who are messing up too. It wasn't just me, sir. But they also tried to persuade us that they weren't the ones at all, that they'd done nothing wrong. So we're going to have to wait to see what Sir Wynne has to say about that, if he's going to say anything about that in Volume 2. Let's hope so. But for now, let's stick with what we've got. I'll get some final reflections to you on the presentation of Volume 1, and I'll get that to you as soon as I can. I'll start that straight after this video, but I need to finish this one. Thanks so much for sticking with me. That was quite long. I don't know how that came across. I don't know if it made any sense. But yeah, thanks for sitting through that with me. And I'll get on with kind of trying to pull together some of the stuff, because there's something in that. There's something in the staging. It sounded superficial. There's something in the staging, something in the way it was presented to us that raises something quite interesting. And I think the other thing I'll probably concentrate on is that thing of restorative justice. There's a problem with restorative justice. You could see it all the way through this report that he was describing one of the problems. One of the problems with restorative justice is causing more damage here. And there's another problem with restorative justice that was kind of embedded in everything that he was saying. Anyway, but I'm doing a teaser now, aren't I? I'll put all of that together and get that to you. So thanks so much for watching. It's good to be back. It's good to have you back, and I'll get on with it and start making more videos if you like. And if you like them, tell me you like them with the little like, subscribe thingy. You know, it helps. It helps support what I'm doing, if you want to support what I'm doing. Anyway, it's lovely to see you. And thanks for watching. Till next time. Ta-da.